All right, everyone. It is Sunday night, time for Real Reefing with Mr. Saltwater Tank. Yours truly. Tonight, we're talking about lessons learned from Mother Nature's reef tank, but we're not going to the Kokomo or anywhere in the Bahamas that the Beach Boys were talking about because there's just not that much to see in the Caribbean that's that interesting. So we're not going there. We're going to the other end of the earth, which is perfect because right now, none of us can fly outside of our countries. So why not do a little virtual safari and see what we can learn from Mother Nature's reef tank. Speaking of Mother Nature, it's Mother's Day. So shout out to all the moms out there. Thank you for doing what you've done, what you're doing, and what you will do in the future. We appreciate it. Special shout out to those mothers who are lady reefers who may be on the webinar with us tonight. Looks like the names, doing a quick scroll of the names, as expected, it's a bunch of bros, but that's all right. All right, so let's talk about lessons learned from Mother Nature's reef tank. Oh, special shout out to my mother who may be on the webinar tonight as well, so I'll have to watch what I say because now my mom is truly listening. Lessons learned from Mother Nature's reef tank. How is this going to start? Well, it's going to start in the place where a lot of our corals come from, especially came from for the past couple of years because Indonesia went offline, i.e. Australia, home of the Great Barrier Reef. Now in 2018 and 2019, I took a group of travelers to the Great Barrier Reef. This is the 2018 group. As you can see, everyone's smiling. This is what happens when you travel with me and you go to Australia. Great Barrier Reef, here's the 2019 groups. We've done this 2 years in a row now. We went to Northeast Australia. Why Northeast Australia? Well, a little bit of geography about Australia, and this will all make sense. That green thing you're looking at in the upper right, that is the Great Barrier Reef. That thing is 2,300 kilometers long. It's freaking huge. Big old reef, barrier reef that's out there. And you can divide it into an upper, a middle, and a lower section. Now, you're in the southern hemisphere, so as you go further south, things actually get cooler. So the southern Great Barrier Reef has water temperatures that are a fair bit cooler than the northern Great Barrier Reef, which is getting closer to the equator. Tropical north, Queensland, way up there where the arrow is pointing, that's Cairns. It looks like Carnes, but it's pronounced Cairns. So if you want to blend in, you say Cairns because that's how they talk about it down there. Cairns is considered the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef. That's how it's sold to the tourist, and it truly is. There's lots of Great Barrier parts of the Great Barrier Reef that are up there, and it's tropical far north Queensland. It's a lot like Florida, so to speak, in the United States. So let's zoom in here because now that we understand where the Great Barrier Reef is in the world, in Australia, you have to understand some of the dynamics of a small slice of the Great Barrier Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef, besides being divided into upper, middle, and lower, once you get into a section of reef, then you can actually divide it further down into inner or coastal reefs, and then mid reefs, and then outer reefs, which are also known as the continental shelf. Once you get beyond the continental shelf, you got nothing but ocean. It drops right off. Now, so let's look at this. So this area right next on shore, this is considered inner or coastal reefs. This is where the saltwater crocodiles tend to hang out. This is also where the water is very murky. If you're a diver, this is what is known as a muck type of dive. This is where your trichophilias come from, your scullies, very dirty, murky water. It's really not that much fun to go diving in, to go collecting in, because it just looks like you're swimming in a bunch of muck. That's where it is. That's where those corals are. So it's very murky water. There's really not a lot of light. That's why those corals that are there don't require a lot of light because they're not used to seeing a lot of light. Then you move further out. Now you're in the mid-reef type of scenario. These are reefs that are not on shore. They're not out there in the continental shelf. These are the midland reefs. So this is where a lot of the tourist boats go because they can get there pretty quickly because they're not that far offshore. Now, the stuff that most of you like, that's way out there on the continental shelf. That's about 30 plus miles offshore. So you're gonna need a little thing to get there called a boat. And you can take a tourist boat, which means you're going to be packed in with everyone else, packed in with the snorkelers as well. And those tourist boats only buy certain spots on the reef. They can only go to 1 or 2 reefs, and then certain spots on that reef that basically run a buoy, and they run all the people over the same section of reef, which is okay for some people, but not for people who come with me and not for what we're looking for. We want to have that flexibility to go where the reef is hot. So we can do that on a private yacht, and we can do that because we have fish collectors with us telling us where to go. All right, so we're way out here on the Great Barrier Reef, 30 miles offshore on this boat. This is the Argo, 96-foot private yacht. This is the same boat that IMAX used to film the movie Great Barrier Reef, if you've seen it. National Geographic uses this boat when they go down there, as well as the BBC. So very nice vessel, set up for diving, set up for luxury as well. We have a chef on board with us. So you can see there's nothing out there but us. We're literally on the edge of the continent, about to fall off in the open ocean, but that's okay with us because you go out there and there's no one else out there. This is us, about 30 miles offshore. Now, both years we've gone, we've had fantastic weather, which has made things really good for us underwater, which I'll show you in a minute. As you can see way out here, there hasn't been any much wind those couple of days. There's no surge. The waves you do see way out there, way out there, that is actually the barrier reef itself. This whole thing is the Great Barrier Reef, but out there is the barrier reef because that drops off literally down thousands of meters to the bottom of the ocean, and then it's just open ocean until you get to Vanuatu or Fiji. So we get out there, but we tuck behind the reef. We're behind the surge, and it makes it very calm. So here's a close-up again. You can see there's where the surge is because that's where the water's coming in off the open ocean. It gets broken up by the Great Barrier Reef, hence the name Barrier Reef. So some of us dive, some of us snorkel. Let me give you a quick look at, quick little rundown for a minute or two of what we're going to talk about tonight. Just give you a little eye candy for those of you that are tired of being stuck at home. Cut the thing. Right it. Give you a sense of scale. Of course, we have some fun at this as well. You got to jump off the top deck. All right, so there's a quick look at the dive footage. I'm going to take you through dive footage and to snorkel footage. So I'm not going to forget about the snorkelers because we take plenty of snorkelers with us as well. So let's take a quick look at some snorkel stuff, and then I'm going to combine this and talk to specific questions or specific lessons to learn from what we see. Remember, this is maybe 10 feet of water. We're snorkeling. We're on the surface. That one. All right, if you don't want to travel now, I don't know what's wrong with you. Let's dive into what we saw. Let's start with, okay, I got to give you one more hero shot. This is us out snorkeling. What you just saw, this was us from above out taking in the Great Barrier Reef. All right, so what can we learn from some of the footage that I just showed you? One of the biggest things that I've seen and learned as a diver and as a snorkeler when I've been on these trips is that water depth really influences coral growth as well as what type of coral you find. Now, it's not so much about what type of coral you find. For me, like we already knew, there's deep water acros and that kind of thing. It's really more about how these corals grow and then why those types of corals are found at those depths. So let's start down near the bottom where we were. We're down here about 61 feet. So not that deep in sense of a dive standpoint, but for most of the time when you want to see hard corals, that's about as deep as you're going to get before you're going to start losing them. So things down here are like this Harita, which we absolutely fell in love with. This is a nice big colony of it. Polyp extension like crazy. The thing for you to get from this photo is look at these branches. They're thicker branches, but they're very spread out. Now, we talked about this in the coral placement webinar. This is the type of coral that has a very big growth pattern, where branches are very spread out. It's more like a tree, and it can do this because it's 61 feet where we are in this photo. There's no surge. There's water moving through. There's definitely flow, but there's no surge action from the waves. You put this coral up top on the reef, and it's going to get smashed to bits. So down low, they don't have that, so that's why these corals look that way. And more delicate corals like this ice fire that are absolutely everywhere, they're down low because that's where they can survive because they're not getting smashed by the surge and the energy of the ocean. Now again, it's not because there's no flow. There's tons of flow here, but it's not the smashing flow like from surge. And these big old teal stags, which are all over the Great Barrier Reef, again, this wouldn't survive at the reef top. But look how big this piece is. The branches aren't overly thick. They're decently thick. That's probably 3/4 of an inch. They're very spread out, and they're not intertwined, so they're not real thick. Again, this works because there's no surge. It's also really cool to look at, and it's even harder to sit there and not go I want to frag something and take it home with me. So down here, this is what we see. Now let's contrast that as we start going up. This is about 25 feet depth. One, you can see the corals look a little bit different because the light's changing, but two, what I really wanted to get from this photo, and what I really started to appreciate from all this is, look at this coral. The branches are not spread out like this teal stag we just looked at. Look at this, everything is very spread out. I mean, you can almost kind of swim through that. If you're a fish, this is much tighter branches. They're very thick too. You could not frag this thing with anything less than a chisel and a hammer because it's simply too thick. It's thicker because it's having to resist the energy, more of the reef energy that it's running into. And everything's getting very close together. You got thicker branches, these little tiny like leaves, so to speak. You see this again, tightly, very tightly packed branches. This coral is very dense, it's very close together. That doesn't mean it doesn't get big. I've seen pieces like this that are 3 feet across, but the point is it's very close together. It's not spread out. It's almost like a thick bush as opposed to that big teal stag that we saw that's very spread out. Why is it doing this? Again, because it's having to resist more and more energy. We're getting up to the reef top here. This is where we're going to start seeing more of these tabling corals that look like this. Again, really tight growth pattern. Why? Because they're getting the surge action. You can see some of the flow and the air bubbles going through in the photo here in the upper left. That's what those are, white specks. Because we're getting higher up, that's what they have to resist. Now we get all the way to the reef top, and it basically looks like scrub. Small bushes, they grow very close to the ground. That's actually Facilipora is what you're looking at, as well as that puffer that are super friendly. They'll follow you all over the roof like dogs. So very tight growth pattern, very close down to the reef, because this is where all the energy, all the surge action is going on. Why? Well, because that's, again, where the surge is. This is me snorkeling, just floating around. Now watch how much I'm going to get pushed around by the surge that's up here. I'm not holding on to anything. Of course, you can enjoy all these clown tangs as well. I'll talk about those in just a second, but also notice the corals. Everything is very tight together. You don't see those big branching acros out there. Everything is really tight and everything is very dense. Those corals are very thick because there's tons of energy up here, because there's lots of waves pushing me and pushing everything else around. Now, usually you don't see clown tangs in this tight of an aggregation. There's actually about to be spawning season. They were probably going to spawn that night. That's where that close together. So this one thing that I've learned by watching clown tangs up at this depth is, number one, they're very solitary. Clown tangs are usually quite mean to each other, and I see that on the reef as well. They're only this close together right now because they're going to spawn tonight, so they're probably not looking for a mate. Otherwise, you see one or two, and they're a good 30 feet from one another. So trying to put two in a reef tank, forget it. The other thing I learned by watching these guys is they're up there in the surge zone like I've been talking about. It's maybe 10 feet of water. There's a lot of flow. It's crazy oxygenation. This is where they're happy. And watching these guys, I said, forget it. I can never replicate this in my reef tank. I'm not even going to try. In addition, that those guys just get very mean. Now, there's other things kind of in the mid-level that some of you might have noticed and some of you might appreciate. Not all of us are SPS stickheads, but this is where the leathers start to show up in the mid-level reef. You don't see them at the top just because there's too much flow. So again, these are mid-levels because that's where there's some surge, but not too much for them. So that's where they show up. So you can literally set your depth if you pay attention enough and go, I'm about this deep because this is this type of coral that I'm seeing on this section of the reef. This is another type of leather. Out there, they call it the magic coral because you can touch it and it actually changes colors and it shrinks, which I always laugh at. It's a good tourist kind of gag. I'm like, yeah, okay, we see that all the time in a reef tank, but hey, I get it. They're out there to entertain. And clams are up here as well. They're usually in 20 feet of water or less because there's a lot of light, but you can see this guy is sucked down into the rock. It literally looks like part of the live rock because that's what works because of the type of flow that they are facing. Now, the topic that likely everyone is going to ask you about when they hear about the Great Barrier Reef is, what about bleaching? Doesn't it happen? Absolutely, it happens, and so does recovery. It's part of the reasons I wanted to take people out to the Great Barrier Reef and how the private yacht is, so I could say, let's look at best of the best, and then let's look at a reef that might have been stressed, that's in recovery, and then let's maybe look at a reef that isn't in good shape so we can understand how this works. This looks like a piece of Pocilloporus. You can see it's bleached. It's still got some growth on there. This was around, but not a lot around. Even when we went to a stressed reef where we knew they were bleaching the year before, it's not like everything was dead. Now, some reefs look rougher than others. This is a section of reef you can tell it used to be alive in a much more way. There's lots of sponge here. There's actually cyanobacteria as well. So this is something that if you came out there to dive or snorkel and you looked at this, you'd be like, okay, certainly it's all dead. But one of the big things that you learn as a diver and as a snorkeler is when you first get out there, you just see the big stuff. And then the more that you're out there, you get used to things and you start narrowing it down, and then you start to see the little stuff. For example, here is a piece of coral that had some bleaching on it. Now let's zoom in here and get a better look. Thing to notice about this is old bleaching. There's coral and algae that's grown over this. There's other types of coral. It's not fresh skeleton. So this bleaching happened, but it didn't take the whole colony. It was just one little section, and that's it. Sounds like our reef tank, right? You can have this nice big colony, and then one little section bleached, and the other doesn't, or you can cut a frag, and the whole other colony gets lost, but the frag stays. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but you see it in the ocean as well. So this happens in your reef tank. You don't want to be as freaked out, because in a way, that's nature happening. You can see it here with this big old stag. Same thing. This piece used to be fully grown out. It was purple all over. It had some kind of bleaching, and now it's stopped and actually regrowing things. So yes, bleaching happens. Here's this picture of a big old acro. This thing is probably 15 feet across. The only section that's left here and alive in the moment is that center section, which is about 6 feet across. So that's still pretty good, but it certainly, there isn't bleaching everywhere, and there is bleaching, and then there is recovery. Now, the other thing that I get, and I got this when I was in Sydney getting a ride to the airport, is you said, oh, Great Barrier Reef, it's all dead. No, it's not nearly all dead at all. It's very centralized type of areas. Take a look at this. Keep this in mind. We talked about this as well. If you went out there and just saw this reef, this section of reef, you'd be like, oh, hell, this whole place is going to hell in a handbasket. Literally, you can swim the next reef over, sometimes even 10 feet over, and you won't even recognize where you are. For example, this is another reef that was maybe a mile or so from the reef that I just showed you. What do you think? Does it look all dead to you? No, I didn't think so. If you think that looks all dead, then I don't want to know what you consider as completely healthy. So let's take another closer look at this. This is the same reef. This is us ounce. This is actually past October. Just kicking around, this is what you see. This is very much a healthy section of reef. There's a section of this reef that had bleached. You can see some bleaching past action here, but everything looks pretty dang good in my opinion. We'll just cruise around here for a minute and let you enjoy. I'm ready to go. Not bad. There's plenty of big tables out here. There's some branching type of corals. There's even some soft corals mixed in there as well. You can literally get it all, and of course, some fish mixed in there too. It looked really, really damn good. It was a joy to just swim over this and just take in everything and try to get your mind around all this coral that you were seeing that was looking very, very good. It was absolutely fantastic to spend some time here out on this reef, just taking this whole thing in, because as you can tell, it looked very good. A mile away, though, you can go to another reef that was partially bleached, but I've yet to go on a reef on the Great Barrier Reef where the whole thing was wiped out. There may be a lot of that section of the reef that was stressed that has bleached, but there's always some amount of coral cover there that's left that is regrowing. So if anyone tells you it's all dead, not true. All right, and then every now and then Mother Nature throws you a curveball, something that you totally weren't expecting, which is coming across something that they're actually quite rare in the Great Barrier Reef. This is a whale shark that we just happened to run across on the same section of reef. We just pulled up, and there's some people there and said, hey, there's a whale shark over there. I'm like, they're just like casual, like no big deal. So I happened to be in my dive gear. I just immediately dumped myself off the back of the boat. I didn't wait for any instructions and just jumped out there and got to spend about 5 minutes with this whale shark. I'm told this is a smaller whale shark. It's hard to get a size on these things because I'm out here in the open ocean. There's probably 1,000 feet of water underneath me, and I didn't really care. I was focused on this guy. I remember swimming out here looking at him going, I don't know where the boat is. I don't really know how I'm going to get back to the boat. Whatever, I don't care. I'm going to focus on what's in front of me and enjoy this moment. He's just out there barely swimming. I'm kicking pretty good. I don't even know my depth at this point, again, because I'm locked on to enjoying this whale shark that was dancing with me. I actually have a photo. My photographer was above me because she didn't have her dive gear on, so she was snorkeling. The whale shark was actually circling me as he was swimming around. So it was pretty cool. We're literally doing a dance, and not something you see very common on the Great Barrier Reef. But here he was entertaining us, entertaining me. So now I don't have to go to the Caribbean and go to Belize to do the whale shark dive because I've already done it. One of my favorite places to dive and snorkel, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Pretty cool moment. Yeah, it's not coral related, but I had to show you all this because if you've ever got a chance to get in with a large animal, it will have quite an effect on you. Very humbling to see these guys just cruising around out there, doing their thing. It really that reminds you just how small you are in the world and in Mother Nature. It's definitely something that I will never, ever forget, was bumping into that guy. Great Barrier Reef, he danced with me for about 5 minutes, and then he just took off, and I knew that was the end. So I said, thanks, buddy. I'm going to go try to figure out where I am in the middle of the ocean and try to find the boat. So that's Australia. Big takeaways there is about how coral morphology, how does it look, varies on depth. It's not all dead. It can be very regionalized in terms of bleaching and recovery. So that's Australia. Let me take you to another place in the world, not too far from Australia. It's dead east of Cairns, actually. Fiji, one of my favorite places in the world to go. The Fijian people are absolutely wonderful people. It's a beautiful country, very, very different animal than Australia, which I'm going to show you in the coral and snorkel and fish dive footage here in just a second. So we were out here in Fiji. Here's Fiji. This is the main island of Fiji. And then you get a little puddle jumper. You fly about an hour and 10 minutes over here to Taveuni. And along the way, all you see along this center section here is just reef after reef. You're only flying about 10,000 feet. So you get to look down and you just see it all. The first time I went, the captain of the plane, who's sitting like right there, there's no cockpit where they shut the door. He's sitting right there. He gets in the plane, and it's so small, like he can't stand up. He's doing one of these numbers. He says, all right, flash your seatbelts, in-flight entertainment, look left, look right. It'll take us about an hour to get there, and we took off and flew off down here to Taveuni. So we get to Taveuni, and then we go to a little private island resort where we go. There's no more than 22 guests, no children allowed as well. So it is a private island that's pristine because there's no one around. Now, every morning you come down and you can either do nothing, you can meet at the beach and do something, and pretty much every night there is a very striking sunset out there as well. This is the most dramatic sunset that I've ever seen. This is footage off my drone. I have not done anything to color correct or color manipulate this footage. That's what it actually looks like. So let's take a quick look around Fiji and get a quick sense, a quick overview of what you're going to see, and then I'm going to dive into it. There's one thing about Fiji is that there's tons and tons of fish. That's about 4 feet across, just to give you a sense of scale. You lose all sense of scale when you're down there because you have nothing to reference against unless someone happens to swim by, and then you're like, oh, that's how big that piece is. So you can see we got acros, we got brains, we got sponges, we got soft corals, you have pretty much everything in Fiji, as well as a heck of a lot of fish. These are Squamopinus, lyre-tail anthias, just hanging out on the edge of the reef here. Here's Bob and Mary Kay. First-time divers. They never dove until they came on a trip with me. They've gone on every trip since and logged a heck of a lot of dives. Again, lots of fish in Fiji, lots of variation here. Quite a fun place in the world, not only for coral, but every now and then you run into something that's kind of a large animal. And turtles are not necessarily large animals, but they're bigger type of animals than you run into on the reef. This guy is just foraging around for algae. He's not even in the coral. He's just cruising around. He didn't care about me at all. I was giving him his distance because my job is to observe, not to touch the guy. He's just cruising around looking for a meal. Didn't bother me any mind at all, which is great because I just got to sit here and film him and enjoy watching this guy work around the reef, doing what he does. It was quite cool. The challenge here is not to get lost or separated from the group, because most people, when they're diving, they're just cruising. They're trying to make ground. Or I'm looking at all the little things to see. I run across this. I've got one eye on the GoPro filming that guy and the other guy watching the group, because I'm like, when they get just on the sight, okay, now it's time for me to take off. So let's start talking about flow in the surge zone, because this is pretty interesting things to see. This is me snorkeling. I'm right on the surface of the water, right here on the edge of the reef. You can see here comes a wave that just broke right there. All this coral is getting smashed by all this energy. And remember that clown tang video that I showed you earlier? This is where the clown tangs hang out, up here. Crazy amounts of flow, crazy amounts of oxygenation because of these waves coming in. I'm getting bumped around here a little bit. I'm trying not to get smashed into the coral by the waves. You can see I just got picked up by one, but I'm trying to get the footage that I want to show everyone, because it's cool stuff, but you got to get close enough to see it. So now I'm trying to swim away off the reef so I don't get smacked into it by the next wave. You can see I'm just getting pounded here. There's all this flow up here. Again, growth type is tight. You don't see a lot of branching corals. You do on the edges here. Back up a little bit. Most of these corals, tablings, they're not that big. The biggest tabling coral you see up here is 18 to 24 inches. Its morphology is very tight, polyp structure, very thick, because it has all this energy that it's getting smashed with. Now, again, one thing to keep in mind about this footage is you're looking at it, you're saying, things aren't very colorful. Here's the thing. A lot of these corals are going to look very good in your reef underneath your blue lights, but in the ocean, you don't have it. It's equivalent to about 5K, 8K type of lighting. So lots of things look brown. They don't necessarily look that pretty, but these corals have all the colors of the coral that have in your reef tank. And this is where I appreciated really good collectors, because they can look at a coral and go, that thing's going to look hot in the aquarium, while you and I would be like, well, I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal about that? So let's take another look at this. This is just another section of reef. Now, this section of reef actually got nailed by a typhoon a couple years before. That's why it looks a little rough, because it got hammered, and it's up here in the surge zone. So it's getting hammered more as well. So you see some tables. Coral morphology is quite tight. There's no soft corals up here because it's simply too much flow for them. See, I just got picked up by a wave there. There's some fish up here as well. I'm right here on the side of the reef too. You see that's where the waves are breaking. You can swim off the reef a little bit and get away from it. But also look how densely all this coral is packed into one another. This is another big thing that I learned about diving and snorkeling out on these reefs. Is there's coral touching one another, there's coral fighting with one another, and that's okay. No, you're not going to replicate nature in your reef tank, but letting these corals get close to one another, to me, it looks like this, which is probably what you want to replicate in your reef tank, which is what we see out there on the reef. There's no better way to become a better reefer than to go out there and dive or snorkel on the reef and see things, because you learn so much by looking at Mother Nature, how she handles flow, just like that, how she handles oxygenation. There's plenty of fish that are happy in that type of crazy surge zones, like those Acanthoris tangs, those clown tangs. That's when I said, forget it. I'm not even going to try to keep them. As you can see, also, we get some pretty corals here. This is a nice purple piece. That's what it looks like under natural sunlight. Imagine what it would look like in your tank. I'm going to back up there. I want to show you just one piece Going back to the piece we were talking earlier about bleaching, so you can easily see in this video right here in the background, that was the same type of coral that's here. It is dead. These are skeletons. It's grown over with algae. There was some kind of bleaching event. And talking to the Fijians, they say, look, every year the reef bleaches, not necessarily the whole thing, but part of it bleaches, and then every year it comes back. That's just part of Mother Nature's cycle of dealing with things. This piece is there coming back. You can even see it's got some bleaching here on its stalk, but it's growing, it's doing well, it looks really happy. That's part of the cycle. That was a big takeaway I had learned as well. Things bleach, things come back. Yes, bleaching events are getting more frequent in Australia. That's not necessarily good. Point is, it's not all dead. Even places like Fiji, they have bleaching as well. And sometimes you just have to hang on like I was there. Now, the other thing that I learned from watching and diving and snorkeling, number one, there's a heck load of fish in Fiji. These are all lyre-tail antheas for the most part. And watching these guys here, I'm at about 15 feet of water. So there's some surge up here, maybe 20 feet. There's a lot of current because I'm on what they call a coral bummy. It looks basically like a hill, so to speak. So there's current coming from deep, running right up this thing and smashing on the top of the reef. So there's all kinds of plankton in the water. These guys are out there working very hard in this flow. They're all out there fighting the flow, swimming like crazy, just picking off bits of food. So watching these guys, these antheas swim, I looked at them and said, if I'm gonna keep antheas, I need to feed the heck out of them because that's what they're used to. I know that's how they feed, like you hear that, but when you see it out there in nature, you're like, they're working like crazy to get to the food. They're always eating the food. They're literally digesting what they're just taking in. That's how they're happy. You can see it out here on this reef top. This was one of my favorite dives in Fiji. Literally blew my mind. The other thing about Fiji is there's lots of diversity. The coral is much more diverse in Australia. The fish are much more diverse. It's a nice red tabling piece there. Would love to have a piece of that. Meanwhile, we've got this parrotfish just cruising around, munching coral right underneath them. Very, very cool thing to see. And we get other types of fish. These are fusiliers. You see these in public aquariums. They're just out there swimming around. This is on a dive called the Fish Factory. The coral cover is okay, but there's all kinds of fish. You literally bump into fish. There's so many fish. Now, then you run into crazy things like this. All that yellow mass back there is something called the cabbage patch. This is one massive, massive colony of turbinaria. I don't know the exact stats on how big it is, but it's got to be at least 800 feet by 600 feet. It's, if not more than that. It's crazy huge. You're just swimming along and all of a sudden, boom, here's the cabbage patch. Now, even though we have all this turbinaria, you can see we've got other corals mixed in there. We've got some sponges, some acros. For the most part, it's just a heck of a bunch of turbinaria. It's crazy. Really blow your mind how much turbinaria there is in this one section. So we get a lot more diverse species in Fiji. Coral cover is different because there is so much diversity that we have things closer together than we get in Australia. So it makes for a different type of experience. As I said, though, we have things mixed in. We get a lot of soft corals in Fiji. This is likely some non-photosynthetic. You probably couldn't keep that in your reef tank, but it's a lot of fun to look at in the ocean. It's out there in the current. It's inflated. It's eating anything that happens to swim by in terms of plankton. Fun thing to see. And oh, by the way, here's a clam tucked into the same bit of real estate wherever it can make a home. It did. And then you run into a nice grouper that's just hanging out there looking at you going, what the heck are you doing in my home? And you're just trying not to disturb it so you can get a really good shot and appreciate it. Look at the polyp extension on this turbinaria, though. It is happy as can be. And again, you get all kinds of stuff mixed in together. Amidst all this turbinaria, you get this very sizable acro colony that is housing a lot of blue-green chromis. This is one of my favorite things to see. You see it more in Fiji than Australia, but you really get to see how coral and fish interact there. These guys are the younger fish. They're maybe 3/4 of an inch, half an inch. You get too close to them, and they will dive right into that coral. The fun thing is, you're supposed to breathe when you dive. That's the first rule of diving, is always breathe. But when you exhale, they go through and they dart right down into the coral. You breathe in, and then they come back out, and you're trying to breathe, but then you exhale and they go through and they dart right back down into the coral. But they're using the coral as coral cover. There you go. I just exhaled and they dove right back in. So it's fun to see how the fish and the coral interact. A lot of times we think of fish and we think of coral as two separate things. In reality, they're tightly close. They're interconnected with one another, and they interact in lots of different ways out there on the reef. So it's made for fun thinking about my aquascaping, about how I can use coral to create cover for fish. Certain growth types is going to give me cover for fish, and putting types of fish that are going to interact with that type of coral. For example, hawkfish will like to perch on certain types of coral. It makes for a unique experience when you see the symbiosis, so to speak, and you have these things working together. All right, so now we've taken a dramatic turn on things here. We're down now about 90 feet on a wall dive. So this is just a sheer wall. This is called a white wall in Fiji. You can't tell, but all that blue stuff is actually white coral. It's all non-photosynthetic white coral. So it goes from literally about 30 feet is where the wall starts, and it just goes straight down. You can't even see the bottom, just down into the depths. So if you're afraid of deep water, this might not be the dive for you. But tons and tons and tons of soft coral. It's just soft coral everywhere. That's why they call it the white wall. And then there's the purple wall. Here we are. I'm at 90 feet, but not 90 feet down. Notice that it's pretty dang dark. There's not tons of light down here. And there's also not those big acros that we saw in shallower water, because there's just not the light to support it. And this is all non-photosynthetic white coral hanging out on this ledge. Now, what's hard to see is all the sunburst anthias that are out underneath the ledges, getting away from the light, because that's very hard to capture because there isn't much light. Now I have a light for my camera so I can see more of it, but you have to be watching this. If you're just looking at the white coral and you don't look up and see it, then you're going to miss it. And there's all kinds of anthias. You can see some there. Those are lyre tails just hanging out on the flow, sitting there just eating all the coral, any plankton that goes by. And then, of course, you have to look up, because every now and then Mother Nature throws you another curveball. That was an eagle ray that just came right over the top of the reef, took off. That was me telling my dive buddy next to me, look, don't miss it. Just came over the top of the reef and swam off into the outside. Soft corals are here. You can see the anthias, the young ones hanging out in the soft coral for the cover. All that is very, very, very deep. Much different look than what you saw earlier in Fiji with the shallow water. So see, Fiji really taught me about surge zones, seeing what fish interact there, what corals interact there, and also seeing how fish can interact with the coral that's in your tank. Now, you're not going to replicate nature, because that's a huge reef and you have a small slice of that in your tank, but you can still use things like corals with hawkfish and anthias to give places for fish to shelter and feel safe. I learned all that just by getting out there and watching what was going on in the reef. So with that, let's open it up to questions. That's our tour of the South Pacific for now. If you're not ready to travel, I don't know what else it's going to take. If you have a live question, raise your hand. I will call on you. You can ask a text question as well. If you would rather not interact live, that's fine. All right, Tim has a question. Tim, make sure you unmute yourself so that we can hear you, and then fire away.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, well, I am ready to travel, as you know. I will wait till June for our travel trip we had. My question is this. So we have tanks that are about 2 feet, 3 feet, maybe 4 foot deep, and we try to imitate what's going on in the ocean to say these are the ones that are in low waters, middle water, and high water. How does that relate? I mean, are we truly recreating this layered effect in our tanks, or is it just for our own appeal?
Well, that's a good question. So some of that is good luck, you're not going to get there, and some of it is yes, you can do it. I mean, the biggest thing about the flow in the ocean is it's laminar type of flow. You literally just have a slice of ocean that's moving through a section of reef at one time. Literally like just moving your tank through your tank and then having another one right behind it. We can't do that in a reef. We have to do it with water pumps. So we have a section of water in like a stream, that's moving through, and other parts of the reef in your reef is not moving at all. So in that regard, forget it. We're not anywhere close to what flow is like in the ocean. On the other hand is, yes, you can do things with aquascaping, Tim, to recreate it. For example, creating those overhangs, whether it be with live rock or with corals that are going to go out and create shade. We talked about that in the coral placement webinar. Certain deep water fish or fish that like to hide, like the sunburst anthias, the Borbonia anthias, they will appreciate you giving them that nice place to tuck under and get out of the way. Now, part of that you have to do when you're planing your tank with your aquascaping is to create some overhangs. And then part of it can be done with coral that grows out and creates those overhangs for you. So there's some give and take with that, Tim. But certainly creating zones in your tank with aquascaping and with coral is a much easier thing to replicate. And when you have those types of zones, those overhangs, very likely they're going to be a lower flow area. Or if you want to put a power head down in your reef and you want to blast water through there, you can do that too. So there's some give and take. I take little bits and pieces from what I can learn every dive or snorkel that I go on and see what I can bring back and put in my tank. But it's parts of it can be done, parts of it, forget it. It's just not going to happen on any given night or any given moment in your reef. All right, if you have a question, remember to raise your hand. We've got some former trip participants on the webinar with us tonight, so they might have recognized yourself. So Muno wrote in with a text question. He says, do you see any seahorses anywhere in the ocean while diving? If yes, where they found? All right, Muno, so I have not run across a seahorse yet. I'm mainly in reefs where we're going it's a higher flow area. We're offshore a little bit. Those seahorses tend to live in lower flow areas or seagrass type areas closer to shore. So haven't run into them yet. I can't say they're not out there because you really have to learn how to look for the small things. Bob's on the webinar. He was remarking to me that was one of the amazing things that he learned coming on the trips and starting the dive was the first couple dives, you just see the big stuff. And then when you start to look, you start to see the little stuff. Then when you can see the little stuff, that's when you find those little gems, but haven't run across any seahorses yet. But they do live in lower flow type of areas because they don't have very good propulsion. You're not going to see them out in reefs like this. They're simply going to get swept away in the current. Great question, though, Muno. Muno also wrote in and says he loves scullies. I love them as well. Those are, the funny thing is, I'll have to see if I can talk to Laura from Kansas Marine about collecting scullies. If you saw the water that they collected them in, you would probably want to vomit because it's very murky. It looks very dirty. The scullies are halfway covered in muck. So it really reinforces that they don't need a lot of light because you see where they're collected from and you're like, oh, these guys don't need to be hammered with light because they got so much muck on them, they don't actually get that much light to them at all. Scullies are a lot of fun. I've run across a couple of them in the ocean, actually even in Fiji, some really bright ones, but they're always tucked away, not in areas that get a lot of light. All right, people are quiet tonight. Everyone, I think, is having their quarantine lifted, so everyone is out and crazy, or they're sneaking in watching the webinar, or they're supposed to be doing something with Mom on Mother's Day. Let's see, does anyone have any questions for me? Here we go. John has a question for me. Wants to know for snorkeling in an old style mask or the newer full face mask. All right, John. So I haven't tried one of the new full face masks yet. The old style masks don't bother me. I have been told that with full face masks you can really see a lot more because you don't have to turn your head to look around. Because with the old style masks are kind of more like this. Full face, you get kind of a dome, much like we would here above the ocean. So I haven't tried one yet. I am interested in trying diving the full face mask because I've told it's the same thing and you don't have to bite on the rag the whole time. Might try one of those this year if I can get out there and get diving, but don't have any experience with the new full face. They look interesting, certainly for someone who doesn't like the idea of biting on the regulator or on the snorkel, someone with a smaller mouth like my wife. The full faces can make a lot of sense. Great question, John. Hope you can get out there. Let me know your experience. If you've had any, John, either way with that, I'd be curious to know what your take is on that. All right, Tony wants to know, He has a 660-gallon reef tank. Nice size, Tony. Corals are doing great. Awesome, great to hear that. Running the calcium reactor and solid oil bleaching as your alkalinity is 12. Wow. Calcium is at 506. A week ago, I just started and installed the skims, zero-bit unit. All right, Tony. So alkalinity at 12 is, for me, up my upper range. I mean, really 10.5 is my upper range, but if it's working for you, if your alk was 12 when all your corals are doing great, this is where I talk a lot about letting your tank talk to you, doing what it likes. If you're at 12 and things look good, look, run with it. Now, you said you started an auto zero-bit unit. What I'm betting you're getting some bleaching is, because zero-bit in a way is like carbon dosing. The idea is that you're stripping all the nutrients out of your tank to make it very low nutrient, much like in the ocean. However, when you do that, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope. You get things too cleaned up and the corals don't look as good. Zero-bit tanks, I can always pick them out because the coral color looks really pastel-y to me. It's not a look that I like, but if you just started the zero-bit, you may have started too much at once and all of a sudden pull down all the nutrients out of your tank's water, which can cause corals to bleach. So I'm curious on why you started the zero-bit. It sounds like things were doing good. I'm curious on why you flipped on to the zero-bit. My guess is, Tony, the bleaching has something to do with starting that zero-bit. Since you started it, if you're shaking those stones twice a day, I think is what zero-bit recommends. I would go to once or every other day. Try not to kick as much bacteria out into the water column. That can slow down the stripping of the water, can help your corals be a little happier. I'm willing to bet if you started it on an old tank, it had things that it liked, and then you went and disrupt things a little bit with that. All right, Nicholas has a live question. Nicholas, make sure you unmute your microphone and fire away.
So I have a question for you regarding how the corals are in the natural reef. Is it better, do you think, to be patient and let the corals kind of create shelves and different landscapes on the rock and go minimalistic on the rock? Or do you suggest creating shelves and artificial rock shelves?
Great question. So, Nicholas, I like to do both. So when I'm planning my aquascaping, I'm trying to create some shelves from the get-go, from that scape, because I know I can always, the rock is always going to be there, and regardless of what coral may do around it, I know I'm going to have that overhang. And when I look at the reef isn't all just one pile of rocks. There's nooks, there's crannies, there's a lot that I can't see, but I see tunnels through things as well. So while I'm building my scape, I'm thinking about giving myself overhangs, caves, shelves, and things like that. Then when I go to place a coral, I will think about how does this grow? We talked about that in the coral placement webinar. It's a piece of coral that I know, let's say it's going to grow more bushy. Okay, maybe I want to put a bushy coral in a place to create some shade. Or I want to put it more on the top of my reef because there's nothing underneath it that's going to get shade. Tables, I like to hang off the side of my reef. One, because they're going to create shade, and two, a tabling coral that's kind of hanging off the side of the reef, growing out like this, creating a table effect and shadow effect. It looks really cool. Like I see them on the ocean. You got this big old coral that's just reaching out there, and it's nothing but coral that's doing it. You're just like, oh, that's really, really cool. So I like to do both. I don't do one or the other. They work hand in hand with me. One thing that I am real adamant about is when I am thinking about aquascaping, Nicholas, is lots of places for the fish to hide. There's this trend right now in the saltwater aquarium world. It's like minimalistic rock. Like people will have maybe 10 pounds of rock here and 5 pounds of rock over there in a 75-gallon tank. And I'm just like, oh, no, like the fish need somewhere to hide. They need to feel comfortable. And yes, if the corals grow in on that tank over the course of years, they're going to have that. But I want to give the rock the opportunity to do that for the fish from the get-go so those fish feel comfortable. Not a fan of the minimalistic scape. It's just not my taste. I like to give myself more kind of opportunity for the fish to be happy from the get-go, and I do that with my aquascape. Great question. All right, so Robert wants to know if I've been to Thailand. Not yet. Thailand, from what I can tell, Robert, looks really good above water. Below water doesn't seem to be as great for what I'm looking for, but it is on the list for places that I want to go. All right, Hans has a question. Love this question, Hans. What's my take on putting coral frags directly on the sand bed versus on your rocks? All right. I just actually had this conversation with a client this week. This is one area where the past 2 years I've drastically changed it. The old line of thinking was, and you get this a lot as a newbie, is you get a piece of coral, you should acclimate it to your tank by starting it on the sand bed and then moving it up for every week on the sand bed, and then a week about part of the way up, then a week halfway up until you get it where it's supposed to be. The idea is you're going to acclimate the coral to the light in your tank. My experience is, number one, most of those corals come from a higher light tank than yours. So needing to get them used to the light in your tank is a lot of times a waste of time. Even if your light is running more in your tank than their tank, I wouldn't put it on the sand bed. My experience with starting corals on the sand bed is that's where bad things happen. Now, we're really talking about SPS here. Like some corals, like some LPS, they like to live on the sand bed. I'm not talking about them. Something like SPS, even some LPSs that like to hang out on the rocks, I found when I put them on the sand bed, bad things happen. They either get covered in sand, whether it's blowing from flow or fish going on it, then they get covered and you forget about them, and when you dig them out, then they're dead, or they get swept away and shoved up into the rock work, and then I don't see them anymore. They get toppled over, and you're always putting your hand in your tank and riding them, which I don't like to do. I don't like to put my hand down in the tank a lot. So when I get corals now, unless it's something that I know came from a very high light tank, or it's a coral that I know that doesn't like a lot of light, I will put it straight on the sand bed. I pretty much put it where I want it to be. I may put just a little bit of dab of glue and then stick it somewhere and go, okay, I'm not committing to it by epoxying it or putting a whole bunch of glue on it, because if it's not doing happy, then I may want to be able to pick it off and move it without cutting it off the base. But for the most part, I'm putting it at least in the same level of the tank where I think it's going to go, or very close to that, because I want to put it there so it doesn't go on the sand bed and then get hurt. Just haven't had good luck with putting things on the sand bed. To me, it's largely a danger zone. Great question with that. That's something that I've massively changed on how I do things and the advice about it as well. Just don't like to do that. Sand bed's a dangerous place. Muno wants to know, what would I suggest in terms of taking bleached coral, such as an acro, out of the tank? He says sometimes I've seen they come back after a couple weeks. So, Muno, what I do with this is, if it's a frag and it's bleaching, I don't give it away. I don't take it out of my tank. Pretty much just leave it where it is. Now, if it's bleaching but still has polyp extension, to me, that's likely mean that it's getting too much light. So then I may try to move it down. Now, if I have a colony of coral and part of it starts to bleach and it's bleaching fast enough that it's concerning to me, then I'm going to clip frags and may put it somewhere else in my tank. I may put it in my frag tank. I may put it in my buddy's tank. Give me a little insurance policy if I want to come back and get that piece. For the most part, I just let things run. I let them work it out on their own. I've seen that the more I'm in my tank, the more I'm filling with things, the more things tend to go wrong. Plenty of times the corals have bleached, I've done nothing and they stopped and they've gotten better. There's been plenty of times when I haven't been doing anything different in my tank and then they start bleaching. So I'm kind of a live and let live kind of guy. I let them do their thing. I try not to get too involved with those things. Every time it seems to be that I put my hands in the tank, things start to go wrong. Yanni wants to know, what would be my minimum suggestion from top of the water for live corals to be placed to create a lagoon pool type of look? Yanni, I mean, you can do 6 inches under the surface of the water. The thing you got to remember, Yanni, is as those corals grow, once they hit the surface of the water, they're not going to grow up anymore. So if you're really close to the surface of the water and you're growing corals that grow up, you might get 6 inches worth of growth out of them, and then that's it. Then all you can do is take rocks out from under them or get a deeper tank. So if you're going to do a lagoon, I'd place your lagoon about 12 inches under the water, and then I wouldn't pick corals that are going to grow straight up like some tall branching acros. I stick more to zoas, some Pasillipora, that's going to stay smaller down, those tight growth type patterns like we saw when we were looking at the surge zones. That's what I would do if I was going for a lagoon type of pool look. But I wouldn't go anything under 6 inches. All right, great question, Yanni. Tim has a live question. All right, Tim A, you are online.
Hi, Mark. I had a question for you as far as on your on the liveaboard that you're on. Did you guys do any type of night diving that involved like the pelagic diving? We see the microfauna in the dark.
Yeah, so we did do a night dive. I have some fun footage, drone footage of us jumping off a boat in the middle of the ocean in the night. So some of that, yes, was out there, Tim. I personally like doing night dives on a night where there's no moon. We didn't get to do that in Australia because the moon cycle was such that it was actually a full moon, which can be fun as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I will do when I can get out on a night dive where there's no moon, is I will go get myself on the bottom, and I got to get everyone else on the dive to do it, otherwise it doesn't work. Then you turn off your lights. So you're sitting out in the middle of the ocean, pitch black, you're on the bottom at least, but you can't see a thing. And if you wait about 30 seconds, your eyes start to adjust, and then you do this. You go, and you move your hands like that, and all the plankton will phosphoresce, and you get all this plankton that's flowing around you, that's glowing, and it's really super cool. It only works if there's no moon, and it only works if everyone on your dive trip will do it, because if there's one light on, the whole thing is ruined. Or admit, the first time I did it, you're like, oh, you kind of lose your breath for a second because you're sitting out here in the ocean. It's totally pitch black and you got your lights off. But once you move your hands and you see the plankton fluoresce, it's quite cool. And the flip side of that is doing a dive when there's a full moon and a clear night. A lot of times you can take your light and you can turn it off. Your eyes will get used to it and you don't need a light. Then you can see things moving around. Not as much things like necessarily in the water column, like big plankton things that you can see, but shrimps are out, urchins are out, eels are out at night, things that you don't see during the day. It's fun to see the parrotfish wrapped up in their cocoon. It's another thing that you totally miss during the day with those types of night dive. It's a very fun thing to do. I love it. We got to do some this year in Australia. It was a lot of fun to step off the back of a boat into the open ocean in the pitch black and see what Mother Nature had for you. All right, Muno, you're the question man tonight. I love it. He says, what are my thoughts on dried pellets versus frozen food only for everyday fish feedings? All right, Muno, so here's my experience with prepared foods. I love frozen. I like feeding my fish nori. Pellets I will do if I know I'm going to be gone for a couple days and I don't have anyone to feed. I also like to do pellets for Anthias. Once or twice a day, we'll dump in a little bit of pellets, and I like to leave it in the flow so the Anthias can mimic their natural feeding behavior and go get those pellets. It's a way to feed them without you having to be there. What I don't like is flaked foods. I found that always tends to lead to nutrient problems. It doesn't really get eaten. And when I am feeding pellets, Muno, I don't like to do a lot of it. I'm very cautious with my pellet feedings. I've seen plenty of pellets that don't get eaten. As soon as they hit the sand bed, no one eats them and they just sit there and rot and create nutrients in your tank. So if I'm home, then I'm going to be feeding frozen a couple times a day, but I will use pellets with Anthias when I'm not going to be home. Or it also takes the guessing game out of it. You don't have to tell your spouse or your tank sitter to come over and feed your Anthias every day to keep them happy. The pellets can get that done. All right, Giovanni wants to know, there's a meat coral that exposes its skeleton when it gets walked on by the cleanup crew. Should I move it because the skeleton is coming into the tissue? So if your cleanup crew is walking over your meat coral and it retracts into the skeleton, that's normal. Corals do that. That's a defense mechanism. Now, if you have damage on that skeleton, on that meat coral, just leave it. You really can't frag those things very well. You're likely going to stress that it's not going to make it through any kind of fragging. You can feed it. This is one of the few times that I would feed the coral. Turn off your flow, put some pellets, LPS coral pellets, Fauna Marin, people make them. I don't have any with me here, but you can look it up, the Fauna Marin product. Now you said you had a cleanup crew. Here's the thing about feeding, target feeding, because you want to make sure that meat coral gets the food and digests it. Your cleanup crew is likely going to smell it and they're going to come booking over there to try to steal it from them. You might have to do that with your fish as well. So when I'm feeding that coral to try to help it recover, I'm going to do that early in the morning before the lights are on, like 5 in the morning when I'm up anyway, or late at night when the lights are off and the fish have gone to sleep. because the fish will steal it. At night, you're still early in the morning, you're gonna have to fend off your cleanup crew. So keep an eye out for that, but I would not expect that your cleanup crew is causing so much stress to your meat coral that is causing it to recede or cause a problem. Great question. I love the meat corals. I love the ones that come out of Australia. There's some big ones out there. I've seen some huge old suckers that come out. They're really a lot of fun to see. They're fun to see on the reef as well. Great question. With that, I'm going to wrap it up for the evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay safe. Those of you that are getting out of the lockdowns, please wash your hands, maintain your distance. Let's keep this thing going in the right direction for everyone so we can get the heck out of here and go travel to exotic places like this on the other ends of the earth and enjoy what Mother Nature has to teach us in our reef tanks. Thanks everyone for being with me. Have a great night.